North American bus market has been monopolized by 3 manufacturers for the last few decades. The biggest player is New Flyer, who pioneered the low-floor family and Excelsiors. Then there is a noticeable step down to 2 regional manufacturers. Canada's Nova Bus and America's Gillig have formed their own mini monopoly in their home country, but there were other manufacturers that have come and gone. One of these was quietly formed in Mississauga, Ontario in 1975 as the Ontario Bus and Truck Company. Their first transit bus was known as the Orion I, and was constructed in a city bus and suburban configuration. The 30-foot model filled a hole left from a similar variant of the GM Classic bus and the lesser-known flexible new-look vehicles. As it became clear that transit buses were the main focus of the company, the truck portion of the name was taken out, with the company rebranded to just Ontario Bus Industries, or OBI. Their Canadian Orion Is were built in-house in their Mississauga plant, while the American models, however, saw some obstacles. Transit vehicles in the US got some pretty nice subsidies, but only if they were constructed within its borders. So OBI had to subcontract manufacturing to TMC to construct their buses under license in their plant in Orion V, New York. These were known as the T30 City Cruiser until 1982, when Orion fully acquired the plant, allowing for the Orion I to be constructed in the US. The Orion I also started the manufacturer's interesting naming convention with each model name and their configuration. The name of the model, the Orion I, is listed here, but the last 2 digits signifies the configuration of that specific model. To illustrate this slightly better, the 30-foot Orion is classified as the Orion 1.501 and 502 for the 1 and 2 door transit configurations, while the Orion 1.503 is the suburban configuration. These are the other Orion I configurations built over the years. By the mid-1980s, the Orion I proved to be a modest success, with around 1,500 units manufactured, including over 900 city cruisers under TMC. OBI experimented with natural gas technology with 2 units converted. It didn't seem to come to very much at first glance, but these units would be important for later. Further experimentation came in 1983 with the Orion II. It became one of the first mainstream minibuses on the market, with their 22 and 26-foot variants. It would perform modestly with smaller operators, as well as larger agencies that started to branch to community shuttle operations. The Orion II would continue production and serving its niche until 2003. The next model in the lineup was the Orion III, which was built in a joint venture with Vicaris between 1984 and 1989, to quiet but modest fanfare. More details on its impact can be found in a dedicated video on the articulated niche. But the Orion III would once again kick off another segment that dominates most regions today. After the Orion III came their most interesting model. Meet the Orion IV. These strange-looking vehicles only saw one customer based in Niagara Falls. They operated in a tractor-trailer configuration, with the front section pulling the rear portion like a train. The Orion IVs were also unique for the fuel they used. These were the first buses to use liquefied petroleum gas, or LPG, which truly made them the bus of all time. The Niagara Parks Board bought 1 single unit and 13 tractor-trailer units. The New York City Office of Emergency Management bought 1 trailer unit as an emergency command center, totaling 26 Orion IV vehicles produced. These things had a decent career, operating between 1988 until their retirement in 2012, when they were replaced by Novas on the WeGo service. As specialized as the IVs were, they could be considered a success at the task they were designed for, and became icons on the Canadian side of the falls for good measure. During this era of experimentation though, competition started to heat up from the other manufacturers. MCI was producing the MCI Classic, and GM had the RMS series. But the biggest threat at the time was New Flyer, who just came out with the D40 in 1987, which quickly became the hottest new bus at the time, while Ontario Bus Industries only had 1 mainstream model, the Orion I, which was looking long in the tooth. Their time experimenting had left OBI vulnerable, and they had to respond to this newfound competition. And in 1989, they released the Beast. To say the Orion V was a success would be an understatement. The generational impact this boxy high-floor bus made across the continent was massive. It became OBI's best-selling and longest-produced model with hundreds manufactured annually. If you have been on any bus in the 90s to mid-2000s, or even newer in some cases, it was most likely an Orion V. This era is also when OBI's brief experimentation phase with the Orion IV's LPG and original Orion I CNGs would pay off. The Orion V CNG, or natural gas, would be one of the first buses to kick off the natural gas segment that is still dominating some cities today. The Orion V also became a platform for their first hybrid, to mixed results. Compared to the Orion I, the Orion V was wider, longer, and more capable, and had a variety of different powertrain and length options. Despite all of this success, however, OBI were still slightly behind. At the same time, New Flyer released a bigger fish in the D40 LF. It would eventually kill off all high-floor designs, with most, if not all, modern buses carrying this low-floor design today. The Orion V was unfortunately designed with a high floor from the start, and converting it to a low-floor design would be next to impossible. So development would start on the Orion VI, a completely low-floor vehicle to compete with the other competitors. It was first presented at the 1993 APTA Expo and later released in 1995. Around the same time, Ontario Bus Industry's name was changed once again to Orion, to associate themselves with their iconic series of buses. Unfortunately, the Orion VI is where the company's fall would begin. The Orion VI was a mixed bag to say the least, as the bus did not perform very well. The good part in all of this is that the newer competition in the Nova Bus LFS performed worse, with a serious design flaw with the aluminum frame. Unfortunately though, the Orion VI failed to compete with the Flyer, which easily smoked them in sales and performance. The Orion's appearance is bizarre, to say the least. Its engine being located in the rear left rather than the middle of the frame also made options limited and underpowered, making them perform worse than a D40 LF. The 6 also came with a hybrid option and became one of the first North American buses to do so, but with it being an early hybrid, problems with the battery packs and motors reared their ugly heads, with the batteries not lasting very long and the traction motors breaking constantly. The Orion VI saw a small number of Canadian operators, with the most prolific being the Toronto Transit Commission, or TTC, who retired them after less than a decade in 2006. That's not a good sign. Also, by 1999, Nova Bus had fixed the issues with their first-gen LFS, and made the second iteration. It wasn't going to challenge New Flyer yet, but became a formidable competitor against the Orion VI, and would later skyrocket ahead of Orion to become the second largest bus maker. This became Orion's first major failure, as the experimental units were either heavily specialized or built for a smaller niche. This saw the next pivotal moment in Orion's story. The company was purchased by Daimler. Anyone that knows automotive history immediately sees alarm bells. Yes, it's that Daimler. The parent company had already been struggling with their catastrophic merger of Chrysler, and some of their struggles leaked into Orion. The early 2000s was an interesting time for the manufacturer, as new natural gas and hybrid variants of the 5, 6, and 7 were being built, but no new platforms were being designed or produced. Around this point, Orion V sales have slowed down, with agencies preferring low-floor models produced by New Flyer as well as Nova Bus, Gillig, and Nobby. The Orion VI was a complete flop and discontinued in 2003, and the Orion VII was, well, dated. By 2005, buses started to incorporate sleeker, more modern designs. New Flyer would release the LFR line, and Nova was being Nova. Orion, meanwhile, had the same tire design from the late 80s. This would change the Orion 7 Next Generation, which received a restyled front end and other fixtures, but at the end of the day, it was still an Orion 7, which, talking from personal experience here, sitting at the back of an Orion 7 is an uncomfortable experience. In 2006, Orion's mainline hybrid system would make its debut on the Orion VII in Toronto, to quite bad reception. They suffered from reliability issues with their batteries and general systems. Also, coming from personal experience again from riding the Orion VII hybrid, it doesn't sound or perform like a hybrid either. The technology would improve on the Orion VII next generation, but it was too little, too late. New Flyer's hybrids have more variations, including articulated units, and Nova Bus would release their 3rd Gen LFS. It not only has a standard rear end like everyone else, but was also lighter and cheaper than the Orion to operate. New Flyer, though, would be the one to end Orion's relevance in 2008 when the Excelsiors arrived on the scene. They were more efficient, lighter, and much newer than the Orion units. The visual difference alone between the New Flyer and Orion are night and day, especially side-on. The final Orion Vs also rolled off the production line, with Vancouver's Coast Mountain Bus Company being the final Canadian customer of the Icon, and the MTA for the US market. The original Orion VII was also discontinued, leaving the Orion VII Next Generation as their only model, where new customers were no longer interested, and instead looked at the competition. For the next few years, Orion were hanging on to their existing customer base in Ontario and New York's MTA, who were the biggest customer for the remainder of their tenure. As the Excelsior and LFS continued to develop and release new variants throughout the 2010s, Orion continued their quiet death spiral. This all culminated in Daimler finally pulling the plug in 2012, with the 2013 model year Orion VII EPA-10 being the final buses built for the MTA. Their assets would later be acquired by New Flyer. So what happened here? Orion seemed to be on top for a while. Well, multiple factors have led to their demise. A notable move was their sale to Daimler. Even at their time of the acquisition, the company was struggling, and their purchase of the Chrysler Corporation was a disaster. Their vehicles not only saw a massive drop in quality and reliability as the two sides fought for control, there was also Mercedes-owned inventory in Europe, where a few of their models have spilled into the North American market for a time. Despite the interesting experimenting phase of the 80s, not very much of it has been realized by the manufacturer, at least until it was too late. Yes, they were the first, if not one of the first, to jump on articulated buses, hybrids, and natural gas buses, but they either never came to much, or started way too late. If Orion took some elements of the Icarus 286 and made their own dedicated articulated model, they could have more effectively challenged New Flyer. An early adoption of the hybrid technology would be possible, but was probably too risky and could have sped up their downfall. The most likely cause of Orion's demise, however, was the ever-changing landscape of the market, and their mistake with the Orion V and Orion VI. Orion's decision to go with a new platform for the Orion VI, rather than modifying the Orion V, which is something that they did with the Orion VII from the start, was an interesting choice. Nova Bus nearly met a similar end of the original LFS. The low-floor bus was exploding in popularity, and creating 11 in such a landscape was one of their biggest mistakes. By the early 2000s, the D40 LF and its variants were dominating, and the aforementioned LFS was also starting to gain momentum, and there were other challengers like Dennis, Thomas, and Van Hool, who were producing their own models for the North American market. They didn't really do very well, but any mistake could prove to be catastrophic, and it might have been a factor in killing off Orion. A similar scenario happened to McDonnell Douglas in the 80s and 90s, as the unluckiest plane of all time, the MD-11, struggled against heavy competition from planes like the Boeing 767 and Airbus A330, with the Boeing 777 being the final nail in the coffin for the wide-body trijet. The Boeing 737NG and Airbus A320 family would also end their relevance for the MD-80 and MD-90 families, leading to McDonnell Douglas's equally disastrous merger with Boeing. Or is it the other way around? Despite their slowdown towards the end, the demise of Orion is an overall loss for the market, especially here in Canada. The current market is being dominated by Nova Bus and New Flyer in a duopoly. Nova has improved immensely in the last decade, and are in a similar position to Orion in the early 90s. Flyer, meanwhile, were never the same. They did become the largest fish in the pond, but their quality and reputation has gone completely downhill. Orion's demise also spelled the downfall and end of the 40-foot Suburban bus. The Nova Suburban is their most disappointing variant, The MCI D4500 was discontinued in 2022 and replaced by the D45 CRT, and the Alexander Dennis Enviro is better optimized for high-demand routes. The Mississauga-based company didn't last as long as other companies, but did bring innovative and bizarre concepts into the market, including Arctics, hybrids, and natural gas vehicles, and will forever be remembered for the role they played to what the North American bus market has become today, for better or for worse.